and we'll get started around 10:02. So if you have a couple minutes to go grab some water, get back, and we'll get started then. Thanks. Thanks to those who've joined in the last few minutes. We'll get started in about a minute. Thanks. All right, it's 10:02 by my watch, and so I will go ahead and get us started. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is an initial conversation with interested members of the public about 2 heat pump programs that the Oregon Department of Energy will be standing up, hopefully in the new year. Wanted to just quickly get started by asking folks to go ahead and introduce themselves in the chat as we get started. Just say your name and then any particular interest you have. If you work for an organization or you own rental properties or anything that you would like to share about us, so we kind of know who's in the audience today and can make sure we're ready for questions and hit some points that we think will be relevant based on who's in the audience today. So just to get started, the Oregon Department of Energy, we are an agency that exists to help Oregonians make informed decisions and also to maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. So heat pumps definitely fit into that mission. As you know, they provide a more efficient heating and cooling than other options on the market. We also just want to flag that this fits into what we do as an agency by being one of our new energy programs, actually 2 of our new energy programs. And while I've got this slide up, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'll ask other Oregon Department of Energy folks that are on the line, whose images you can see on the screen, to say hello today. So my name is Christy Splitt. I'm the Government Relations Coordinator for the department. I'll also be sort of your host today as we go through the program, or the programs, I suppose. And I'll hand it off to James.
Hi, James Kogel here. I'm a policy analyst at the Department of Energy and also will be the Administrative Rules Coordinator for the 2 programs. Thanks.
Great. Stephanie?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephanie Cruz. I'm a facilities engineer for our energy efficiency and conservation section, and I've been following and supporting the program from legislative concept and will be sticking with it for the duration.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Doug Bear, analyst in the Wildfire Recovery Program, which currently issues incentives for heat pump installations.
Great, and then Patricia.
I'm Patricia Phillips. I'm here to help with just trying to get the meeting going and to take some notes. So let me know in the chat if you're having any issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. So really quickly, an overview of how WebEx works, if it's not familiar to you, is we are big fans of using the chat. That's why we had you try it, to introduce yourselves so you know where it is, had a chance to find it, hopefully. For those who couldn't find it, the screen in front of you looks, my screen is black when I look at it, but I hear other people's is white, and it's inexplicable to me, but you may have a black screen, you may have a white screen, but you can see who the panelists are, and then you can also see into the chat, and that's a good place for you to go ahead and ask any questions along the way. You can also raise your hand, and you can raise your hand a couple of different ways, but the one that you can see easily on the bottom here is if you click under reactions, raise hand is the top one. We kind of make fun of the icon. It doesn't really look like a hand raised, it looks like a fist raised. So that's the one to look for. So if you would like to raise your fist at any point, we will go ahead and call on you when the next right opportunity strikes for an interruption, and we'll have plenty of chance for questions as we go through. So I'll move us along. Yeah, one thing to note, we do have a couple folks on the phone. So just for folks on the phone, before I move on, you can push *3 to raise your hand. Is it *3? And then *6 to unmute. So if you're on the phone and want to engage in the conversation, that is the way to do that. And I'll try to remind us of that throughout the conversation. So what I'm going to do is go over sort of Senate Bill 1536 a little generally, and then I'm going to move us into the two programs one at a time that we're asking folks for input on as we approach rulemaking for these two new programs. And along the way, I will break for questions, so we can do like hand raising and questions at that point. Or again, I'll keep my eye on the chat. And so after I talk about each program, I'll go ahead and see if there's any questions in the chat. So it's kind of the approach and the plan here. So no need to hold questions till the end. Just go ahead and either raise your hand or put them in the chat. And then whenever I kind of get into the next logical break, I'll grab you. So for those of you who don't know the origin story of these two heat pump programs, Senate Bill 1536 passed the legislature in February of this last year, 2020. So just about 6 months ago, the governor signed the bill and we were able to start getting to work on the programs. And the bill was a response to last year's heat dome event. So for those of you who recall, we had extremely hot weather, mostly in the valley, the Willamette Valley, and down further into the state, as well as Washington and Canada, BC were also affected. And in Oregon, we had 100 Oregonians die. Most of them were in their own homes. Heat waves are the deadliest natural disaster that can happen. And so frankly, giant coalition of organizations worked together to bring a cooling concept, is what they were referring to it as, to the legislative session. And so what came out of that bill are actually several different measures to address heat relief. There's, for example, an emergency heat deployment program, emergency air conditioning deployment program that the Oregon Health Authority is running. There's also a program at the Energy Trust of Oregon where landlords can get like portable air conditioners to create community cooling spaces. And then there's a lot of provisions directing sort of landlords what they can and cannot do when it comes to restricting air conditioning units, for example, in their properties. So a lot of different pieces are in that particular piece of legislation. The agency was also directed to do a study in the bill regarding cooling needs for affordable housing throughout the state. So there's a lot going on in the bill, but today we're just going to talk about two things. And those are the two things listed right here: the Community Heat Pump Deployment Program and the Oregon Rental Home Heat Pump Program. And as we get started in our conversation today, I just want to make a note on the Inflation Reduction Act. So this bill passed, gosh, it's maybe been 6 weeks now. It used to be just last week or something, but time is flying by. So as you know, this passed not too long ago. And the U.S. Department of Energy is currently hard at work on implementing a bunch of programs from the Inflation Investments and Jobs Act. And so we're still waiting for details on that bill that passed last November. And so we do not expect to get details on the aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act for quite a while. Now, for those who've been paying attention, they'll know that there are some heat pump provisions to the Inflation Reduction Act. Those provisions have very little detail in the legislation themselves, and we have no idea when we'll get the funding in order for us to have programs that reflect that new funding. We're not sure yet, for example, if these 2 programs we're working on could just take the money and do more work for more folks throughout the state for longer, or if it'll require us to set up new programs with new rules. So in the meantime, what we decided to do as an agency was what I call setting up our programs in a vacuum. So we know that the IRA is out there and we'll have some heat pump provisions, but we want to make sure that we have a package for Oregonians to get heat pumps starting early next year. So that's our goal. And when we find out more about the Inflation Reduction Act, we'll come back and we'll get our programs dialed in so that they can reflect that new stream of revenue. I do want to flag with the Inflation Reduction Act, there are income restrictions. So for example, you'll hear kind of a big number of the highest possible incentive for heat pumps, but that is for folks that are low income. And then the program, it looks like, might cap out at 150% of area median income being the highest income level, we think, in reading the statute. So we'll wait for details, but I just wanted to flag that off the bat to the folks that are on the line. So does anybody have any questions about what's in Senate Bill 1536, or I guess about our approach on the IRA, knowing I don't know many details? And then we'll dive into the heat pump programs. Right. Sandra, I'm going to go ahead and take you off mute. All right, what's your question? Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I was interested in the date of effectiveness. I know that when the bill was passed, it said that April 1 was the date of effectiveness. So does that mean that any heat pump installations thereafter would apply?
So at this point, we have kind of a 2-part answer, and then I'll dive into the other 2, into the programs. So the Oregon Rental Home Heat Pump Program has a provision in it that says that you have to apply before the installation. So that program will not be retroactive. The community heat pump deployment does not have a restriction on retroactivity. However, most of the details for that program will be left up to regional administrators. So I'll get to that in a second. And so at this point, we were interested in hearing from folks if they want us to have something in the rules one way or another. But at this point, I think it's something that would be left up to the discretion of the regional entities. And I'm not sure that some might be inclined to provide incentives retroactively, some might not. So that's an answer for now that's kind of a non-answer on that program. So we don't know on that program, whereas rental home, we know that they will not be retroactive.
Oh. No.
Okay, thanks for the question, Sandra. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about the next. Let me make sure there's nothing in the chat. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. All right. So as I mentioned, the department is assigned 2 different heat pump programs in the bill. And I just kind of gave a hint about how they work. So the community heat pump deployment program will provide grants to regional entities, and then those regional entities will administer the program. So the program will not be administered by the Department of Energy. These regional entities can provide a variety of different types of financial assistance, so they can design a program that works best for their region. That could be loans, grants, rebates, other incentives. It could be a mix of all of those things. And those rebates, grants, incentives, loans would go to support the purchase and installation of heat pumps. And one important note is that it will also include related upgrades. So that means that if you go to get a heat pump installed and it turns out that you need some other work done, there's a list of different types of work that can be done. And so then we'll be able to support, or the regional entities will also be able to support anything on that list. And then the budget for the program overall is $10 million. And we expect about at least $7 million of that to go out directly to support incentives for heat pumps. We have staff to hire out of that budget. And then also we expect the regional administrators to have some things that they need to do, but there are caps on how much of the money can be spent for administrative costs. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So the way that the bill lays out the regional entities uses this map here. These are what are called in statute economic development districts in Oregon. They're commonly called, this program that has the economic development districts are known as regional entities, regional solutions. And so if you've heard regional solutions, this is the map of the regional solutions districts. And we'll be collecting applications from different entities in each of those regions and choosing one or sometimes a group with one lead to run that program. So I see that there's a chat up. Jennifer, is that you with your hand up? I'll unmute you.
I'm just curious, when you were discussing, the different regions could take different approaches. Some could do grants and others could do loans. So there's not going to be a base requirement, like people can get grants of X amount. In some cases, a region could opt just to do loans.
I believe that could be possible. We could in the rules do something that would preclude that, but the statute seems open to a variety. However, it does say that we set rebate amounts and things like that for the program. So I think we imagine there being a rebate aspect to all of them. So I don't know if James wants to chime in. He's our rulemaking coordinator. If I'm wrong about that, if he wants to correct me, but I think that that's the case.
Yeah, we were thinking of allowing the different regions to kind of customize propose customizing the financial offerings that would best suit their region, while maybe stipulating some requirements around maybe loans being zero interest, these sort of things, and also kind of setting a max level for dollar amount and percentage total cost for the financial offerings.
Jennifer, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of strange if, some regions don't allow grants, but just loans and, but yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks. I just think that the reason it's done that way is because financing sometimes can be hard to obtain for certain populations. So I think they're trying to make room for kind of a mixed approach to funding a project for one particular household, let's say, where they're not super low income, they're kind of in the middle, so they could afford some financing, but they also get a grant. I think that's the idea. I also see a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to go to the next slide to answer Thomas's question. And then as far as Amy's question, I believe that this is being recorded and will be posted online. And if we aren't recording this one, we're doing the same sort of meeting on the 26th, and we'll record and post that one. So moving on to that next page, and then I'll answer Thomas's question after I say a couple things. So eligible entities to apply to be regional administrators are listed here. So I'll just kind of toggle back quick. So these are the regions. And then this is the list of who can apply to be a regional entity. It's a long list. It includes electric utilities. And we have a question about could electric utilities apply, but if their service territory doesn't match that map over here, then how does that work? And we actually envisioned something like this happening. When the bill was being drafted, a member of our staff pointed out that could happen. And so there's a provision of the bill that actually says that a utility could be the lead applicant, but they would have to, but to cover the rest of the territory in that region, they would need to work with another entity to cover the rest of that region. So it does allow for that to happen and has a mechanism for making that work in the bill. To answer that question. And if I didn't get that right, James, I encourage you to chime in. I think I did. And then Tucker, you have your hand up. I'll unmute you. And then we'll go to the next slide. Hi, Tucker.
Add in on this, when you go back to the slide with the regions and it specifically, I'm sure that we're not the only utility that has this challenge, but just something for you all to think about moving forward is that you have, for OTEC specifically, 2 counties in the Northeast Oregon region, and then we have 2 counties in that greater Eastern Oregon region. And, we'll be routing this through the same employees and same departments if we were to be involved in it. And just a thought for that is that it may make it somewhat challenging for our members as well as us as a utility just to keep the rules straight between those 2 separate regions, depending on how much they differentiate. So something that was flagged to me and that I wanted to just mention to this group. So that's one piece of feedback I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good to know. Yeah, using county maps is tricky because utilities don't follow county maps. These maps rely on counties and kind of group them together. So it's a really good flag, and we'll make a note that we'll be thinking about how to aim for some sort of collaboration. But one thing that I'll note is that the bill does require the regional entities to work with the utilities in some ways. So hopefully that'll help with communication and program design. And if we, in the design process or in the implementation process, when the utilities catch things, hopefully that'll provide an opportunity for the regional entity administrators and utilities to work together. Really good point. Thank you.
Could I just jump in there, Christy, a second?
Yeah, totally.
Just to kind of touch on something was mentioned. Just that the bill does kind of state that the eligible entity that serves the community, like you were saying, that is located within more than one region. So across the 2 regions there, the eligible entity may only apply for a grant for the region within which has the most amount of individuals that they serve in that community. So it's just kind of one entity per region.
Great.
That might make sense.
Yeah. That's if OTEC wanted to apply to be an administrator. So I'm not sure if that's. All right. I'll move on. All right, so one thing that I want to make sure folks understand is there are going to be some common standards or goals across each region. And one of the examples of that, or the main example of that, is where prioritization happens within the programs. And this is who the financial assistance should be directed toward. One of those prioritizations is around environmental justice communities, which is defined in statute. And it includes low-income communities, communities of color, communities with immigrants, and it also includes rural and coastal communities. So it's a pretty broad definition. Just making sure folks, when they see that, know we're essentially talking about communities that have been left behind in the past when there have been programs like this, because maybe they don't have the technical the capacity to apply, for example. So that's one area of priority. The other 2 areas of priority have to do with the households themselves and their heating systems. And one of those is any household that relies on bulk fuels, which is defined in the bill and includes heating oil, electric resistance heating, which is like baseboard heaters is one example of electric resistance heating. The reason for this prioritization is that bulk fuels like wood or heating oil, they either have more greenhouse gas emissions associated with them, or they have particular public health ramifications. Wood stoves in particular emit particulate matter that can have health impacts on folks and create poor air quality during cold weather in certain parts of the state. And then electric resistance heating is included because it's essentially very inefficient and very expensive. So we know that people who have electric resistance heating, like baseboards, pay more for energy. So that's why that's included. And then also folks that don't have a functioning heating or cooling system are also prioritized. So I am getting ready to move us into to James taking over to talk about rebates amounts. Does anyone have any questions on these prioritizations before we move on to talk about the rebate amounts? Okay, great, James. I'll hand it over to you to talk about this.
Yeah. So first thing you'll probably notice is there's no specific dollar amount here. We will be establishing a maximum dollar amount for financial assistance offerings that the regions can provide. And we're envisioning that it'll be similar kind of to the maximums that we set in the rental program, and we'll go through those shortly. But with the fact that we're just going to kind of set kind of a cap and allow the regional entities to make potentially customize, that's kind of the direction we're going in, but also looking for feedback as well as we develop these concepts. So just kind of wanted to give a loose outline of kind of the direction we're going, because obviously different regions require different, may have different needs. And so that's all I wanted to kind of touch on this particular slide.
James. I think it's probably worth quickly pointing out too, and if anyone has questions, feel free to raise their hands, and then we'll move on to the other program. So if you have any questions about the community heat pump deployment program, now's the time. But while folks are thinking about their questions or raising hands, I'll just share the bill lays out how we are to allocate money across the regions. And it has a variety of different factors we're supposed to consider in setting that budget. And we'll be setting that budget based, we'll also need to include, like, does every region have somebody come forward that wants to apply? So it's possible that we might have regions where there's no entity that chooses to come forward. So that money that would otherwise go to that entity could be spread to other places, for example, until somebody comes on board with an interest in having a program. And we would have to figure out how to do that. So just a flag that the budget is not straightforward, like each 11 region gets the same amount of money, but it depends on factors like essentially the weather. And like, is it hotter or colder in that place? And then some energy burden, which is when there's a particular, basically low income folks, low income communities will be prioritized as well. Jennifer, I'll unmute you.
Hi, I'm just tracking on the point. Do you anticipate alerting entities, eligible entities within the region that nobody's stepping forward and that they may want to consider stepping up before the money gets sent to another region? Or
yeah, that's a good idea. We did do a pretty aggressive job of putting every possible eligible entity we could think of onto the list to spread the word about this meeting. So we already have this like 300 strong email list that includes possible regional administrators. So we'll definitely keep communicating with them whenever that RFP process opens up. So
okay, great.
Thanks for the idea that we target districts when it looks like we're not hearing a lot of interest. We're seeing applications come in. Thanks, Jennifer. All right, I will move us on to the other program. All right, so by the way, I will give a shout out to Alan, who is an old friend of mine, who's a landlord and I know is here for this reason. So it's great to see you. I told him to keep calling us to remind us to get this program going. So here he is. All right, so, oh, somebody just asked a question about the last program. So let me do that real quick. And then we'll move on to the next. So the question is, what is the intent where these heat pumps are to be installed? Is this for community centers? No, this is for homes, for both programs. And then I will move us on. So the Oregon Rental Home Heat Pump Program is quite different in how it will work. And for anyone familiar with Oregon's Solar and Rebate Program, which our agency administers, this program is built off of that one. It's been very successful. We know how to run it. We think it provides some real benefits to folks as far as how it works around consumer protection. So this particular program will be administered by the Department of Energy, and it's financial assistance in the form of rebates and grants. And again, like the last one, it is for purchasing and installing heat pumps and related upgrades. And this financial assistance is for owners of rental units. And then it's also for manufactured dwelling or RV. It also applies for manufactured dwellings or RVs who rent a space in a manufactured dwelling or RV park. And then the way that this particular program works, like the solar rebate program, is that contractors apply for it on behalf of, in this case, landlords. And so that means that it's an upfront savings for the landlords, and they don't have to wait until the whole thing is over to get money back. They just pay less to the contractor from the start, and in the end, it's the contractor who, when the project is all done, gets that check in the mail. And this particular program has a $15 million budget. And James, this one's for you, I think. Or no, it's not. Actually, I'm sorry. I got excited. So the statute sets out some information on the rebate level that we'll be following, and this is for statewide. There's, again, not that regional administrator approach. It's us. And it's up to 60% of the purchase price of the heat pump can be covered by the program. And then we can also make a different determination for manufactured dwellings or for RVs. And the bill also provides an ability for preferences in providing rebates that benefit low to moderate income residential tenants, and also support heat pumps with superior energy efficiency. So we can give a greater rebate for a better or more efficient heat pump. And then we have a phone caller with a question. And I believe you can *6 to oh, you already figured it out. Good job. You're better than I am at remembering the numbers. What can we do for you?
Hi, yes, I'm a landlord and I would love to take advantage of having a heat pump installed in 2 of my rental homes. And I wondered if you were going to have restrictions as far as how they are heated. I have one that is heated with a gas wall unit, and then they also have cadet heat, and the other one is a forced air gas heater. And I did get a quote this last summer for the house that has the wall heater, and it was $15,000 to put in a heat pump, and that's not something that I can afford. And I wondered if the program would allow me to have a heat pump installed, even though I have gas heat in my home.
Yes, the answer is yes. And you might have heard in the last program that there was a prioritization for certain fuel types, but it didn't exclude somebody with a gas furnace adding a heat pump under that particular program. This particular program doesn't have that same prioritization list. And so as far as I know, and James can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the existing fuel for heat in that particular property would not be an issue. And neither of which you described, I think, would be an issue specifically. Is that right, James? You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting nodded heads. So I think this program should work for you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, and for anyone else on the call, the existing heat source shouldn't make a difference. And again, on the other side, in the community program, it doesn't exclude, it just preferences certain heating sources. So yeah, I'm through with this slide. I don't see any other hands up or questions in the chat right now. So I will move on to the next slide. And this is one for James. And this is, if you remember, he mentioned some rebate amounts in the other program. This is kind of where we're starting in the conversation for both programs, although we'd give, as he said, the regional administrators some kind of leeway. So if you are interested in the numbers, this is a chance for James to tell you about them and you to tell us what you think about them.
Thanks, Christy. We are looking to kind of set up the rebates by the kind of equipment type, so the ductless heat pump, the ducted heat pump, or the ground source heat pump. And I've put a range up here, but we're looking to kind of have staggered the maximum amounts by the minimum kind of efficiency standards, which is the federal. There's going to be the new standard in 2023, the federal efficiency standard, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. And then we'll kind of step it up with kind of a higher efficiency incentive, and then we'll step it up for those people that are either rental units for like qualifies low to moderate income, that are serving low to moderate income individuals or households. And then we'll step up for a higher efficiency unit that is for a rental unit that is serving kind of a low to moderate income eligible household. And so for the rental units, we keep it within that kind of this below the 60% total cost. And again, that will range where we'll have a lower percentage for the 40% down for just kind of the baseline, the federal standard, no income qualification, and then a higher percentage for the higher efficiency and that qualifies that low to moderate, serving that low to moderate income community. And then we're going to have a slightly different range for manufactured homes or RVs that are being leasing a space in a manufactured home or RV park, and that will allow the total cost to go up to 80% for that higher efficiency, and for those owners of the manufactured homes or RVs that qualify as a low to moderate income, and have a slightly higher cap. So that's kind of what we're proposing. This is very tentative, very early draft. We're looking for feedback on how this will play into the existing field of programs and incentives that are available, as well as the rising costs for heat pump installation and equipment. And just kind of a flag, these programs also tie into related upgrades. So there's a kind of a side part where there's grants in this program for related upgrades, kind of replacing or upgrading an electrical panel, maybe doing some duct sealing or duct replacement, and that will be kind of caps based upon whether they income qualify or not. Somewhere around 2,000 to 4,000 is where we're initially kind of looking at, up to potentially 100% of the total cost. However, once again, just kind of looking for feedback, putting these figures out there, looking for some feedback in what people are seeing in different parts of the state. I see there's a great comment there, and I appreciate that. And also how these play into the incentives that are available.
Great. And for folks that can't see, there's a suggestion that in some parts of the state, things are more expensive. So something for us to think about as we consider the amounts. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? Just hoping you'd raise your hand, Alan. I'm unmuting you now. Slowly. Oh my gosh, let me unmute you. There you go. You should be unmuted now.
All right. Well, I wasn't able to see the chart. I don't know if other people had that problem or not, but it may have answered my question. Question is whether air to water heat pumps will be included in the program in the rental property I own. Air to air heat pump is not really practical because of the nature of the structure being a large brick home. So can you answer that question?
Yeah, James, go ahead. I'm pretty sure that the bill doesn't define heat pump in a way that would exclude it.
It is kind of includes all air source heat pumps and all ground source heat pumps. And Stephanie is kind of our technical expert, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie. But any of the kind of water to air heat pumps would also be included. I think that was what you were referring to, though. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that's correct.
Great. So yes, it's included.
I was speaking about air to water.
Yeah, that's what I think what he's saying is that it is included.
Okay, good. I thought I could just say water to air. So I just want to be sure. Okay, great. Thank you.
And okay, so then Doug, do you have a question or something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just wondering if James could give an idea, a range of how far, based on the budget that's allocated for this program, how far would these incentives go in terms of how many customers could be served with this range of incentive level? approximately?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Happy to. I was looking at that, and it really depends on the incentives that are applied for. If every single person that applied for the incentive requested the maximum amount possible, including maximum upgrades, it would be around 1,600. But if everybody claimed the minimum amount possible, baseline level, it would be 15,000 dwellings that could be installed, incentivized to install a heat pump. So there's a huge range depending on what heat incentives are applied for. And I would anticipate somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 potentially, depending on the range of incentives we're getting.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Jeremy in the chat, and the question is more about the program generally than these amounts. But do you have any plans? Well, it's kind of both. Do you have any plans for making sure that combined incentives, ODO plus utility or ETO plus or Energy Trust of Oregon plus possible tax credits, that the incentives aren't too high? And this is something we've been hearing a lot about in some of our initial meetings with folks that are listed in the bill for us to talk to. And it's something we've been definitely thinking and talking about as well. We don't want to see a situation where there's kind of a converse issue where prices can start to go up so that people see the rebates out there, raise their prices, because people can kind of piece together the rebate in a way to charge more. So we want to kind of not have an effect on the market like that, and also avoid anybody sort of profiting from either being a contractor installing a heat pump or being a homeowner and getting more back than you put in for the heat pump itself. So do we have any specific, I know we're aware of the issue and we're trying to figure out how to solve for that. Is there anything more specific that we can say at this point, James?
I don't think so. Just kind of gathering the information about how these incentives layer and potential costs. But as we know, kind of costs are just generally increasing at the moment, and people are seeing higher costs than they were maybe 2-3 years ago.
Yeah. One thing I'll say too is that we have in our contracts for other programs that we have sort of a prohibition on taking more than 100% of the cost across different programs. So somebody could be in violation of their project or their contract for doing that. So that is something we can do in sort of performance agreements with the regional administrators, kind of requiring that they adhere to that. And then also something that we can consider for our contracts with the contractors that apply for the rental home program. And then the other question was from Michelle, and she's just wondering if this rental program is different from the existing ETO incentive rebate for individuals homeowners. It is different, and we are working with Energy Trust of Oregon so that people can layer the two programs together. So the community deployment program that we talked about first, that can be directed at homeowners. This particular program cannot. And I'm not sure if you're a homeowner or looking to put heat pump into a rental home. But essentially the idea that we have is that you could go to different entities with different rebate programs available to you and put them together in order to maximize your savings. We just don't want you to maximize it too much, but we definitely want the two layered, and they are different programs. So you can put them together to get a greater amount. And then, will there be a reservation notification system for when the end of available incentives in sight? So just making sure contractors know that the incentive wouldn't be honored. Thanks for this good question. One of the reasons we modeled this off of our solar rebate program is because we kind of know how to do all that stuff with communicating with the contractors. We currently keep a frequently updated amount of money that is still available for our solar rebate program online. And I imagine we would do something like that. So contractors could look online and see how much money is available in the program within a reasonable time frame of most recent update. And then in the past, we have done email communications to let folks know when, well, at first the program was selling out in like 3 days, really fast, or in minutes or hours. Now we've got more money for that solar rebate program. So it's been more of a kind of keeping people posted when we add more money that's available or we're getting close to the end of the budget. We haven't had getting close to the end of the budget in quite some time, but that's something we would emulate, I imagine. And then, are you expecting the regional administrator to be the same for both projects from Benedict? I'm so glad you're here, Benedict. The answer is the regional administrators are only for that first program, and for the rental home program, it's all through the Department of Energy. So the rental home heat pump program is through us, not through regional administrators. All right, so then I'll get to the hand. Jennifer, you're off mute.
Do you anticipate like divvying up the state pot by population, or you know, so that each region gets a set amount, or is it just kind of like a first come first serve if you're eligible in any region? So for example, if there were a lot of applicants in the Portland area, that region could you know, take some monies that might be available in other regions, or how do you see that?
Are you talking, I think we missed the very beginning. You're talking about the rental home program?
No,
Okay.
I'm sorry. The regional program, will you have like a certain allotment per region, or
Yes.
will it just be one big state pot and who's ever there first gets it?
Yeah, it'll be allotted by regions, and the bill has details about how we're going to prioritize the budget for each region that include like, is it a particularly cold or warm region? Is it a region with a particularly high energy burden compared to other parts of the state? So there's just different factors that would be included in making the determination about how that money would be divvied up.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it's designed to be as equitable as it can be versus just here's for this region, here's for that region, or a first come, first serve.
Great.
Great. All right. I would love it if Patricia would put James's contact in the chat for Michelle, because that's who you can contact with questions. And our last slide will have his email too. And I will move on to the next slide. Thanks. All of this has been so helpful. I just love how everybody's been chiming in and asking questions and giving us information that can help us design the best program to work for you. So thank you so much for that. I want to quickly talk about the heat pump efficiency standards, or James can talk about those. And then we have some questions for you, and hopefully for the last 10 minutes or so, we can just get some answers to those questions and hear any other questions that you all have.
Yes, so the federal minimum standards are changing in the new year, and as we are kind of still developing this program, we'll be looking, and there's a requirement in the bill for the community deployment program to kind of match those federal standards. We'll be looking just to have that as the standard when we launch a program, and so we have those information, but just kind of for ease, we've just kind of said we'll be matching those standards and we'll be putting the specifics in the rule language. And that includes using the new test standards for the heat pumps. So using the new HSPF2 and the new SEER2 kind of metrics. And we'll kind of try to be consistent between the two programs. That's why we're going to be kind of adopting both for both, even though the requirement is just kind of rooted in the community deployment program. And then we'll also be having specifically stating those kind of second tier of incentives for the higher incentives in the rental home program. And with the regional one, we're kind of going to be, we're tentatively looking to potentially just leave it up to the regional entities to kind of structure their proposed incentive offerings for their region, but for the rental home, we'll be kind of staggering it in that higher efficiency tier that I was talking about earlier for the slightly higher the rebate amount. Is looking at kind of a 10 to 15% efficiency increase over those federal minimums. So that's kind of like the slightly higher efficiency gets a slightly higher rebate in that rental program.
any questions about the efficiency standards or anything on this slide? And I'll move us over to the next slide, which is questions we have for you all. So we don't need to go in any order. We just kind of wanted to pop these questions up. I'll ask them verbally real quick here, and then just we can have sort of an organic conversation based on whatever comes to your mind. I know we have a couple questions in the chat, so we'll get to those after I kind of get those creative juices flowing in everyone's brains. What technical requirements should the agency and or regional administrators have for installers and for installations? What works well about existing heat pump incentive programs that you want to see us do also? What challenges have you seen with existing heat pump incentive programs that we can learn from? How do you see these new programs fitting in with existing programs? We've talked about that we're trying to figure out how to make that work. We're interested especially in ideas from you if you have thoughts about how that could work. And then what other issues or factors should we consider when drafting the rules for these programs? And then while you're kind of thinking about those, maybe raising your hand or putting any thoughts you have in the chat, I'll go ahead and take on the couple of questions that we have. So Michelle is down for us to address this later, but she is a homeowner, might rent it out in the future. Curious if she should proceed in installing a heat pump AC mini split system now with the ETO rebate, or if it's beneficial to wait. So the timing, she's wondering about the timing and will it be retroactive? And so we already mentioned on the retroactivity, the rental program cannot be retroactive. It's possible that the community programs, the community deployment program, the regional administrators will allow for that. And in the meantime, our timeline for popping these programs up is early in the new year. The rulemaking process, we have to do like notice and do there's like a bunch of sort of like posting the plans and giving people time to give input. So we have to follow that particular timeline before we can open up a program. So we'll get the rules done, and then from getting the rules done, we can set up things like an online application, and all of that stuff will happen after, or maybe a little concurrently with the rulemaking process. So early in the new year, we expect to sort of launch the two programs. Just as a note, the renters program will start, and ideally then your contractor will be able to apply for the rebate right then, right? But the community deployment program, when the program launches, it'll really be going out to those regional administrators, those potential regional administrators with a request for proposals. So it will take longer for those particular programs to open up to homeowners. So if you're anxious to get something now, then you have the option of doing the ETO program. If you live in a non-Energy Trust of Oregon territory, you should contact your utilities, and they have heat pump offerings as well. And there you can get some money there. There's also some tax credits available from the federal government. If you can wait, then you could potentially layer things together. So it's really just a decision for you of how comfortable are you waiting. And if you're comfortable waiting, then there's a little bit of a gamble, particularly on the community program, because each community might do something different. And you could have a community decide that they might have an income requirement or something like that. So, I admit that it's awkward, but just to be fair and honest, I think that you could wait and then find out that like the particular program doesn't work for you for some reason. So I just want to be candid about that. I'd rather be candid and have it be kind of frustrating, but that's the reality of where we are. And then of course you could do all of these things, wait, get the heat pump, and then find out the federal program opens up. So we understand that that's a frustrating dynamic, and we share the frustration. I just think our hands are tied on how to deal with that. So hopefully that's a fair answer on that one. Thomas had a really technical question about what will either program minimums be for the HSPF2 or SEER2, or is that still being developed? Is that a one for James or Stephanie? And then I see we have a hand up. I'll get to you in a sec, Lisa.
Sure, I can feel it, and Stephanie can correct me. So yeah, just kind of, obviously this is going to be using the HSPF2 standards, so the kind of the levels we're talking about, the numbers differ to the old HSPF standard. So for a split system heat pump, it would be an HSPF2 of 7.5 or greater and a SEER2 of 14.3 or greater. And for like a single package heat pump, an HSBF 2 of 6.7 or greater and a tier 2 of 14.4. Sorry, 13.4. But again, those are kind of the new federal standards that are coming in. And obviously we'll have some for the ground source heat pumps as well.
Great. We have a really related next question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask that, and then Lisa, I'll call on you after this one. Mentioning federal standards are often skewed to favor air conditioning efficiency over heating efficiency. Are we required to follow federal standards, or can we adjust for local climates? This might be a good one for Stephanie, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can chime in on it. And yes, we do need to follow the current federal minimum standards for our program. And yes, there is does tend to skew toward cooling efficiency over heating efficiency, and our climate is still mostly driven by heating. So that's something that we're kind of working on balancing. We've had at least some consideration for a higher HSPF as the driving standard that we could include instead of staying at the federal minimum for HSPF. So we'd be interested to hear your thoughts and comments if that's something that you would be advocating for.
Great, thanks. We'll put up on my next slide some contact info. So if you do want to follow up with thoughts on that, we'll have a place for you to direct that feedback, or you can make it in the chat too. Lisa, you can go ahead. Oh, I need to take you off mute though. Now you can go ahead.
In conjunction, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I've been looking into heat pumps in conjunction with exploring installing solar panels for my home, just because of all the incentives I had heard about with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Mm-hmm.
And just in terms of the research that I've done for the heat pumps, it seems like the federal standards are so high that in discussions with 2 different HVAC contractors, I would need to buy the top of the line heat pump and pair it with a new gas furnace or electric furnace, such that the cost to me would be about $30,000. And so when I read about these incentives, both on the federal and state level for residential homeowners, it seems very, very low, that it just economically doesn't make any sense at all. And so I guess my comments are, I'm a bit surprised that somebody was saying, are you kind of watching out to make sure the incentives aren't too high? Because from my perspective, they're just so low, it's not economically feasible. And the other comment is, in terms of the demographic for who these incentive programs are targeted for, I was thinking that I would qualify as being low to moderate income because I'm retired and I don't really have income, but I'm not really from, like a historically disadvantaged demographic. And it just seems like the demographic that perhaps these entities are geared towards, it makes me wonder, how could they possibly afford the balance of what isn't covered under incentives? So I guess I'm kind of wondering, on a net basis for the residential homeowner program, either on a dollar basis or on a percentage basis, how much would you expect a residential homeowner to have to pay after being eligible for federal and state incentives, knowing that these efficiency standards are so high, it would force somebody to buy a very expensive heat pump in order to qualify? That's my understanding.
Yeah, I think there's a comment in the chat from somebody that does heat pump installations, I believe, as the company, and they're saying that what you're being quoted is, quote, outrageously high. So that's part of it. Generally, it looks like a replacement heat pump on a typical ranch home is closer to between $11,000 and $15,000. And if you're getting a more efficient heat pump, depending on where you live, you generally shouldn't, given new heat pumps, be required, or it doesn't necessarily necessitate having an additional gas furnace as well. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds on your particular case, given that it's 11 o'clock right now. But what I would love to do, Lisa, is on the next slide, which I'll go to now, is there's James Kogel's contact info. And we wouldn't be able to like answer specifically your case, but we could follow up maybe between Stephanie, James, and I with a little bit more information to answer your question more thoroughly. Because we're at 11 o'clock and I'm sure folks need to go, I just wanted to quickly, there was a, do we have plans for QA checks or other enforcement of quality? And I think somebody just put a Teams chat to me to answer that question, but I think the answer is we are working on that. So we have that for our solar rebate program and plan to emulate that for our heat pump program. And then there were a couple questions about making sure that our programs will work for utility programs, the BPA standards, any hurdles we're seeing in coordinating with BPA incentives. We're working closely with BPA and we'll be making sure that they take a look at our rules to make sure that there are not conflicts that would prevent the programs from working together. It's definitely on our radar and we want to make sure it all works. So on that note, hopefully we can follow up with Lisa offline. Otherwise, I think we got to everything in the chat and don't have any other hands up. So a couple minutes late, thanks for staying. Just if any, I'm happy to stay for a couple of minutes as folks drop off. If anybody wants to ask anything specific, we're happy to stay on for a couple of extra minutes. There's going to be an identical meeting to this next week, just a different set of people attending. We'll have both of those conversations posted online. And as you'll see, our next step is that after we're able to kind of take the conversations we're having now, write up draft rules, we're aiming to have those draft rules go into the formal rulemaking process around November 1st. Again, and then there'll be a time for public comment on those draft rules. And then the program ideally will open, like I said, both of them in early 2023. So this is not the end of the road. Benedict asked a question if we're going to have a RAC. We are doing these types of meetings and a lot of meetings with entities ahead of time. And I actually have been trying to reach out to you specifically to try to set one of those up. So I'm glad you're here. So I'll get hopefully your email address from registering so I can email you to see if we could get together and chat. But the idea is that there'll be these meetings to formal rulemaking and doing more one-on-one or group-to-group meetings in the meantime. So feel free to go. And then if you have any questions, we'll stick around. Hey, Lisa, I took you off mute. I think we could just discuss a little bit further. I don't know where you are in the state. If you're like in a particularly cold climate, maybe that's what someone's thinking. Maybe
No,
Stephanie can
Portland.
engage with us. Yeah, our understanding is that one of the reasons you get those more efficient heat pumps, the reason the feds are kind of kicking up those standards for a variety of reasons is because they work better in a variety of different climates. So states like Maine have like really robust heat pump programs because heat pumps now can work in colder climates. Every day they get better and better. So,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I mean, I talked with two different contractors. One did not give me a formal quote, but he said that in order to get a heat pump that meets the efficiency standards required by the federal government, it's going to be $20,000. And that didn't even count replacing the furnace, but it was his impression that Oregon will only provide incentives if you're on an all electric system, which it sounds like you're saying that's not true, that for the residential program, it's okay if you have a gas furnace. But he was under the impression it had to be all electric system.
I believe that is the case for the Energy Trust of Oregon program right now.
Oh, okay. Right. So
is the
it
only,
does-
which is the main incentive available to you right now.
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that would mean I would need to switch to an electric furnace as well. And I think my situation is different than maybe, I don't know if you've got a typical applicant for these incentives, but my the incentive to me was really from an environmental perspective to reduce the load on the grid and also have it be economically beneficial to me in terms of having a reasonable break even period to recoup the costs of solar and a heat pump. And I mean, the solar system also was very expensive, much higher than the info I read online in terms of average cost per watt for the state of Oregon. I couldn't find anything Portland specific. But so, you know, I saw the comment that somebody said $30,000 estimate is ridiculous, but you know, I kind of feel like I got 5 different quotes on the solar panels and they were all in the same ballpark and all were way higher than what the numbers online would indicate. And so I don't know if contractors are just giving me really high numbers because of the demographics of where I live or, you know, like what the house looks like or so forth. So it seems like that's kind of why I asked the question before of like, what is the demographic of who you really want to give the incentives to? Because even though I would qualify, I believe, on your income levels, I think just overall demographic, I don't really maybe morally qualify because of, you know, the size of my house or what have you. But it just seems like if the federal government wants to incentivize people to switch to solar, and if that's the case, to me, it made more sense to go to a heat pump because I run the heat way more in the winter than I run the AC in the summer. And my heat currently is on gas. So if I were to do solar panels, it seemed like I would be able to get more benefit by switching to heat pump, even though my current HVA system is only 4 years old. It's not needing any replacement anytime soon. So it just seems like the financial hurdle to do this, maybe it's not really meant for people like me who are trying to do it from an environmental perspective and, you know, obviously an economic perspective. Maybe it really is geared towards the demographics you describe, people who are on the very expensive types of heating, things like the oil or what have you, that economically perhaps their break even would be much faster, or maybe they've got an older HVA system that will need to be replaced sooner anyway. So
I think that
for me to know whether or not these quotes that I'm getting are kind of legitimate or not. And, you know, maybe it is because maybe my house is bigger than the ranch size that the person quoted as being $10,000 to $15,000. So I'm just trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, that's really hard. And I highly recommend talking to Energy Trust of Oregon directly, particularly on the solar panels. If you Google them, they have kind of like people who are there to help you kind of navigate this stuff and are experts on the solar panel side. And then they do have a heat pump program, so I'm sure they can talk with, since we don't have the program yet, we don't know as much as they probably know.
Them already on the solar side.
And so I can't really help you on that side. What I can tell you is you keep referencing the federal dollars, and those federal dollars are not here yet, and they won't be here anytime soon. So what you're looking at from the Energy Trust of Oregon and from us are just state programs, state dollars only. And so the federal programs will come online when they do, and we don't expect it to happen anytime soon, and there'll be more dollars available then. Otherwise, it sounds like, right, if you have a really new HVAC system, it's probably fairly efficient. And so the break even might be different from you. I'm also surprised you would need a whole new system to go with a heat pump. That just seems strange to me. My house has an old gas furnace, but about a decade ago, the previous homeowners added a heat pump. And so we have both, which is like a common arrangement. But I think in the last year, our gas furnace kicked on twice. It doesn't come on very often. The heat pump does the work the vast majority of the time, and that's a 10-year-old heat pump. So you can kind of imagine the technology's gotten so much better that in Portland, if I had a new heat pump, I don't think the gas furnace would ever kick on. So so I think it's just interesting, but I can't tell you specifically contractor to contractor or anything like that. And I wish I had somebody on our staff that knew more that could be like, oh, here's what we think is going on here. But if you're interested in more of an incentive, then you might need to wait until those federal dollars come on board. And that will be for a variety of different clean energy enhancements to homes.
When you say wait for the federal dollars to come on board, do you mean in the form of the federal tax credits, or are you saying that the federal government is likely to give the state of Oregon money to deploy for programs?
They're going to give us money to deploy for programs. And if you're below 150% of median income, you'll likely qualify for something in there. We don't know what they're going to look like yet, though. So, or when they're coming.
Yeah.
Christy, I was gonna.
Oh, go ahead, please, Stephanie.
I was gonna chime in and add, Lisa. It sounds like you're potentially looking at replacing the heat for all of your house, which you said it sounds like it's a larger structure. It's probably what is driving this cost prohibitive quote that you're getting. Sounds like you're like a multi-stage, multiple head system, ducted system that they're trying to replace for you. So another option for you to at least consider when you're talking to contractors and exploring this is to look at doing a heat pump that doesn't serve 100% of the load in your house, especially since you have a brand new gas furnace, and offsetting your gas furnace with a smaller heat pump system. So there's several options you could probably pursue that would get you closer to those goals. And I would be happy to talk more offline if you'd like to kind of do a little bit of a troubleshooting session, and maybe I can learn a little bit more about your particular situation.
Okay. Yeah, because I think I understand what you're saying. I think the problem is that house has a single stage furnace, but it's got one of those 2-zone control system things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the furnace wasn't really appropriate for putting in a 2-zone system. And so the contractors were telling me that the furnace really needs to be a variable speed furnace. So in order to get the correct high efficiency heat pump, it should be a variable speed one. I think that's what it's called. And then a variable speed gas furnace. So like everything has to be upgraded because the initial install wasn't really correct.
Appropriate for your situation. Yeah. And when you start talking about the variable speed heat pumps, those are not required as part of the federal minimum efficiency standards, but in certain cases they tend to be the better solution for a particular situation. So I'm sorry to hear that you are in a tough spot. It sounds really hard to navigate. And like I said, I'd love to chat a little bit further offline and see if I can help you navigate this.
Okay. Do you want to give me your email address or contact info to reach out to you?
I'll drop my email in the chat for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad that Stephanie can be more helpful than I thought we could be. So that's great. Awesome. Okay. Well, I know we still have a few folks on the line. Was there anybody else that wanted to ask any questions before we end the call? All right. Hopefully Lisa got the email address. I'll give us, before I close the call, I'll make sure that she gets a chance to grab it.
Yeah, I've got it. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. All right. Well, to those of you still here, thanks for sticking around and learning more. And to the rest of us, to the team here at Odo, thanks so much. And I will go ahead and leave the webinar and leave it to Patricia to end the call. Thanks, everyone. Bye.